The space station called Horizon 7 floated in the darkness between 3 star systems. It was a massive structure, built by 12 different species who had come together long ago to share knowledge and peace. At its heart was the Unified Species Academy, a school where the brightest young minds from across the galaxy came to learn. Professor Velix had taught at this academy for 300 cycles. He was a Keth, a species that looked like giant insects with hard shells and many eyes. His subject was galactic military history, and he believed he had seen everything in his long career. He had taught proud Torvan warriors who stood 3 meters tall with skin like stone. He had taught the Sheth, beings made of living crystal who could link their minds together. He had taught the quick and clever Orelli, whose forearms never stopped moving. But this year was different. This year, the Academy had accepted its first group of human exchange students. Velix did not know what to make of humans. They were a young species. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel 200 years ago, which was nothing in galactic terms. Their homeworld, a planet called Earth, was classified as a death world. This meant it was a place of extreme danger, with wild weather, poisonous plants, and animals that hunted and killed. Most species avoided such worlds. Yet somehow, humans had not only survived there, but had thrived. Still, looking at them now, Velix could not see what made them special. They were small and soft. They had no claws, no armor, no venom. They seemed fragile compared to the other students in his class. Most of them were polite and quiet, always watching and listening but rarely speaking. One human girl in particular caught his attention. Her name was Unipark, and she was 18 standard years old. She had black hair that she kept tied back in a simple braid, and dark eyes that seemed to look through things rather than at them. She sat in the back of the classroom and never raised her hand. She never argued with other students or tried to show off her knowledge. She just sat there, quiet as a shadow, writing notes in a small book. Velix had checked her academic records. She was intelligent, certainly. Her test scores were excellent. But she showed no ambition, no desire to compete with the other students. This puzzled him. In his experience, young beings always wanted to prove themselves. They wanted to show they were strong or smart or brave. Unipark seemed to want nothing at all. Today was an important day. The Academy had installed a new holographic archive system, a machine that could create perfect 3-dimensional images of historical figures from any species. The images could move and speak, recreated from historical records and genetic data. It was an impressive piece of technology, and Velix planned to use it to teach his students about the horrors of war. He believed that young beings needed to understand violence to truly appreciate peace. They needed to see the faces of those who had caused great suffering. They needed to know that evil was real and that it wore many faces across many worlds. The classroom filled with students. The Torvan took their seats in the reinforced chairs built for their massive bodies. The Sheth clustered together, their crystal forms catching the light. The Orelli chattered among themselves, their 4 hands gesturing rapidly. And the humans sat in their small group near the back, looking around with curious eyes. Unipark took her usual seat. She opened her notebook and waited. Velix stood at the front of the room and activated the holographic projector. The lights dimmed, and a soft blue glow filled the air. "Today," he announced, his mandibles clicking as he spoke, "we will study the most feared warlords in known history. These are beings who cause death and destruction on a scale that is difficult to imagine. They conquered worlds, destroyed civilizations, and left scars on the galaxy that remain to this day." The students leaned forward with interest. Even the usually calm Sheth seemed to pulse with anticipation. "I will show you images of these warlords," Velix continued. "You will identify them and explain their significance." This exercise will help you understand the true cost of war and the importance of the peace we now enjoy. He noticed that Unipark had looked up from her notebook. Something had changed in her expression, though he could not say what. She was watching him now, really watching, in a way she never had before. We will begin with warlords from species that have been part of galactic civilization for thousands of cycles, Velix said. Then, because the archive has recently added Earth's historical records, we will examine what horrors humanity has produced. A few students glanced at the humans with curiosity. One Torvan made a sound that might have been amusement. Humans were new to the galactic stage. What could their short history possibly offer compared to species that had been conquering stars for millennia? Velix did not share this dismissive attitude, but he had to admit he was curious. Human history was filled with violence. Their planet's record showed endless wars, genocides, and atrocities. They had even come close to destroying themselves with nuclear weapons before they developed space travel. But surely their greatest monsters would seem small compared to beings who had commanded fleets of starships and destroyed entire worlds. He looked at Unipark one more time. She had put down her pen. Her hands were folded on her desk, and she was sitting very still. Her dark eyes reflected the blue glow of the holographic projector. For a moment, Velix felt something strange. It was a feeling he had not experienced in a very long time. It took him a moment to recognize it. It was unease. He pushed the feeling aside. He was a professor with 300 cycles of experience. He had nothing to fear from a classroom of students. Certainly not from a quiet human girl who never even raised her hand. He activated the first hologram. The lesson began, and none of them, not the professor, not the proud Tarvan warriors, not the ancient Sheth minds, knew that everything they thought they understood about humanity was about to change. Unipark sat in her seat and waited. She had been waiting for this moment for a long time. She knew what was coming. She knew what faces would appear in that blue light. And she knew that when those faces appeared, she would finally have something to say. The wolf pendant hidden beneath her uniform felt warm against her skin. Her grandfather was watching. The first hologram appeared in the center of the classroom. It was a Torvan, but not like the students sitting in their reinforced chairs. This Torvan was ancient, his stone-like skin covered in scars that told stories of 1,000 battles. He wore armor made from the bones of his enemies, and his eyes burned with a cold fire that seemed to reach across time itself. The Torvan students straightened in their seats. Pride filled their faces. Grand Crusher Morvac, one of them announced in a deep voice that rumbled like thunder. He conquered the Spine Nebula in 40 cycles. He commanded a fleet of 10,000 warships. His campaigns killed 12 billion beings across 7 star systems. Professor Velix nodded, his mandibles clicking with approval. Correct. Morvac was known as the Stone That Walks. He believed that weakness was a disease that must be cut out of the universe. He showed no mercy to those who surrendered. He once ordered an entire moon to be cracked open because a single city refused to bow to him. The hologram of Morvac stood there in silence, his massive form casting a shadow across the classroom. Then it faded, and another figure took its place. This one was a Sheth, but not like the crystalline students who sat together in their cluster. This Sheth was darker, its crystal form shot through with veins of black that pulsed like a diseased heart. It did not have one mind but many, a collective consciousness that had once reached across 3 star systems. The Sheth overmind known as the Devouring Silence, a Sheth student said, his voice echoing strangely as if coming from many mouths at once. It enslaved 3 systems through psychic domination. It did not kill its victims. It consumed their minds and added their thoughts to its own. When it was finally destroyed, the minds it had taken did not return. They were gone forever, absorbed into something that no longer existed. The classroom was quiet. Even the proud Torvan looked uncomfortable. "Correct," Valak said. The devouring silence was defeated only when the Galactic Council united 7 species against it. The war lasted 200 cycles. The cost was immeasurable. The dark Sheth faded and a Keth appeared. It was a female, a hive queen with a body twice the size of Velix's own. Her eyes were cold and empty, like windows into a void where nothing lived. "Hive Queen Sketh the Cleaner," Velix said, his voice growing quieter. "My own species' greatest shame." She believed that the universe was too crowded, that resources were being wasted on species too weak to deserve them. She ordered the sterilization of an entire habitable moon. Not destruction, sterilization. She wanted the land and the water and the air, but she did not want the beings who lived there. So she released a biological agent that killed every living thing larger than a microbe. 50 million Orelli died, including their children, their elderly, their sick. Every single one. An Orelli student made a sound of distress. Its forearms wrapped around itself as if seeking comfort. She was eventually captured and executed, Valix continued. But the moon she cleansed remains dead to this day. Nothing grows there. Nothing lives there. It is a monument to what hatred can do when it has enough power. The Hive Queen faded. More holograms appeared. A Vrel emperor who had burned 100 colonies because he believed their inhabitants were genetically inferior. An Orelli scientist who had created a plague that killed only children, believing it would force evolution to favor the strong. A being of pure energy that had consumed 3 suns, destroying every planet that orbited them, simply because it was hungry. The numbers grew larger with each warlord. Millions dead. Billions dead. Entire species wiped from existence. The students sat in silence, their earlier pride fading into something heavier. This was the weight of history, the terrible truth that peace was built on mountains of bones. Through it all, Unipark remained still. She watched each hologram with careful attention. She listened to each story without expression. But her hands, folded on her desk, had tightened until her knuckles turned white. Professor Velix noticed this. He wondered what she was thinking. Was she afraid? Was she disgusted? Was she grateful that humans had never produced anything like these monsters? "Now," he said, turning to face the class, "let us turn our attention to humanity. The archive has recently integrated Earth's historical records. I confess I am curious to see what your young species has produced." Several students shifted in their seats. A Torvan laughed softly. "No offense to our human classmates," the Torvan said, "but what can they possibly show us? They have been in space for only 2 centuries. They have never commanded fleets or conquered systems. Their greatest weapons are toys compared to what we have seen." Some of the other students nodded in agreement. Unipark did not react. She simply waited. Valix activated the holographic projector again. The blue light flickered and swirled, reaching into the newly added Earth archives. It searched for the most significant military figure in human history, the being who had caused the most death and destruction, the monster that humans feared above all others. The hologram solidified and a small man appeared. He sat on a horse, a 4-legged animal that humans had once used for transportation and war. He wore armor made of leather and metal, simple compared to the technological marvels they had seen before. His face was weathered by wind and sun, lined with age and hard experience. He was not tall. He was not physically impressive. He looked like someone's grandfather, tired from a long journey. But his eyes were different. They were the eyes of a wolf studying a flock of sheep. They were patient and calculating, and utterly without mercy. They looked out across the classroom as if measuring each student, deciding their worth. determining whether they were useful or whether they should be erased. Identify this warlord. Professor Velix commanded. Silence. The Torvan students looked at each other in confusion. The Sheth pulsed with uncertainty. The Aurelie whispered among themselves, their forearms gesturing in puzzlement. This small, soft creature was humanity's greatest monster? This old man on a horse? Then, from the back of the classroom, a hand rose slowly into the air. Una Park stood up. "I know who he is," she said. And her voice was steady and calm and somehow more frightening than any of the monsters they had seen. She walked toward the hologram, toward the small man with wolf's eyes, and she smiled. It was not a happy smile. "His name was Temujin," she said. "But the world remembers him by another name. Genghis Khan." She stopped in front of the hologram and looked up at his face. "And he was my grandfather." The classroom was completely silent. Every eye was fixed on Una Park as she stood before the hologram of the small man on the horse. Professor Velix's mandibles had stopped moving. The Torvan students leaned forward in their massive chairs. Even the chef, who usually showed little emotion, were pulsing with a strange light. "Your grandfather?" Velix finally managed to say. "Surely you are speaking in a symbolic way. This figure lived many centuries ago, according to the archive." "I am speaking genetically," Una replied. Her voice remained calm, almost soft, but it carried to every corner of the room. "Scientists on Earth have studied his bloodline. They estimate that about 16 million men alive today carry his genetic markers. Through his sons and grandsons, who continued his conquests after his death, the bloodline spread across an entire continent and eventually across the world." She touched the pendant hidden beneath her uniform, feeling its familiar weight. "I am Korean. My ancestors lived in a land called Korea, the Mongol Empire. The empire that Genghis Khan built ruled Korea for nearly 100 years. The genetic evidence in my family line was confirmed 3 generations ago. So yes, Professor, when I say he is my grandfather, I mean it literally. His blood runs in my veins." A Torvan student made a dismissive sound. "Forgive me, but I fail to see why this matters. He was a leader of a primitive people on a single planet. He rode animals into battle. He used arrows and swords. How can he compare to the warlords we have studied, beings who commanded starships and destroyed worlds?" Una turned to face the Torvan. She was so much smaller than him, a tiny figure looking up at a mountain of muscle and stone-like skin. But she did not seem afraid. She did not seem impressed. "Let me explain," she said. She walked slowly around the hologram, looking at it from different angles as she spoke. Genghis Khan was born with the name Temujin. He was the son of a minor tribal chief in a land of endless grasslands. When he was 9 years old, his father was poisoned by enemies. His family was abandoned by their tribe and left to starve. He spent his childhood fighting for survival, eating roots and rats and whatever his family could catch. The students listened in silence. When he was a teenager, he was captured by a rival tribe and made a slave. He wore a wooden collar around his neck and was beaten regularly. Most people in his situation would have given up. They would have accepted their fate and died in misery. Una paused beside the hologram and looked at its weathered face. He escaped. He gathered followers. He built an army. And then he began to conquer. She turned back to the class. Conservative estimates suggest that his military campaigns killed 40 million people. Some historians believe the number was as high as 60 million. At that time, the entire population of Earth was only about 400 million. That means he killed between 10 and 15% of all humans alive. The classroom remained silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was heavier now, filled with something that might have been disbelief. "Let me put that in terms you might understand better," Una continued. If the same percentage were applied to the current galactic population, it would be equivalent to killing 800 billion beings. 800 billion. And he did this not with starships or plasma weapons or biological agents. He did it with horses and arrows and swords in a single human lifetime, starting from nothing. An Arelli student raised one of its 4 hands. How is that possible? The logistics alone would be impossible. You cannot kill that many beings with primitive weapons. You can if you are efficient, Una said. You can if you are ruthless. You can if you turn killing into a system. She began to walk again, her footsteps soft on the classroom floor. Genghis Khan did not just defeat armies. He destroyed civilizations. There was an empire called Khwarezm, a wealthy and powerful nation with millions of citizens. The emperor of Khwarezm made the mistake of insulting Genghis Khan by executing his ambassadors. Una's voice grew quieter, but somehow that made it more terrible. In response, Genghis Khan invaded. He did not simply conquer the cities. He erased them. He killed so many people that the rivers ran red with blood for days. He stacked the skulls of the dead into towers that could be seen from miles away. When he was finished, the empire of Khwarezm had gone from 5 million people to perhaps 250,000. The Torvan student who had spoken earlier had gone very still. He diverted rivers to wash away cities. Una continued. He poisoned wells so that survivors would die of thirst. He ordered that pregnant women be cut open so that no children could be born. He wanted his enemies to not just die, but to cease to exist, to be erased from history as if they had never been. She stopped walking and faced the class. Some regions he conquered did not recover their original population for 500 years. 500 years of emptiness. Of ghost towns and abandoned fields and silence where there had once been millions of voices. Professor Velix made a soft sound, almost like a gasp. He killed so many people, Una said, that the forests grew back on farmland that was no longer being tended. Scientists have measured this. The amount of carbon dioxide in Earth's atmosphere actually dropped because so many humans died that their farming stopped. His campaigns were so devastating that they temporarily reversed the climate of an entire planet. She walked back to stand directly in front of the hologram. Your Grand Crusher Morvik killed 12 billion across a nebula over 40 cycles, using starships and armies and all the technology of an advanced civilization. My grandfather killed a percentage of his world's population that would equal 800 billion of yours. He did it in 25 years, with horses and arrows, starting as a slave boy with nothing. She looked at the hologram's wolf eyes, and for a moment, she seemed to be looking at someone she knew, someone she understood. You asked me to identify this ancient warlord, Una said, turning to face Professor Velix. You are showing me my grandfather. And then she smiled. And the smile was cold and knowing and full of secrets that these alien students could not begin to imagine. Now, she said softly, do you want to know why we humans keep his memory alive? Do you want to know why we tell our children about him, generation after generation? Do you want to know the real reason humanity might be more dangerous than you ever imagined? The classroom waited in breathless silence. Una Park took her seat and folded her hands on her desk. Because Genghis Khan was not special, she said. He was not unique. Human history is filled with people like him. He was simply the most successful. And we remember all of them. We remember every single one. The silence that followed Una's words lasted for a very long time. It was the kind of silence that happens when people are trying to understand something that does not fit into their view of the world. The alien students stared at the small human girl who had just casually explained that her ancestor had killed more beings. Percentage-wise, than any of the galactic monsters they had studied. Professor Velix was the first to speak. His voice was careful, like someone walking on thin ice. "Miss Park," he said slowly, "you mentioned that Genghis Khan was not unique. That human history is filled with beings like him. Can you explain what you mean by this?" Yuna nodded. She did not stand this time. She simply spoke from her seat, her dark eyes moving across the faces of her classmates. Before Genghis Khan, there was a man named Alexander. He was called Alexander the Great. He conquered most of the known world by the time he was 30 years old. He never lost a single battle. When a city resisted him, he burned it to the ground and sold every survivor into slavery. She paused to let this sink in. After Genghis Khan, there was a man named Timur. Some called him Tamerlane. He admired Genghis Khan and tried to rebuild the Mongol Empire. He killed approximately 17 million people. He built towers of skulls outside every city he conquered. He once ordered that 90,000 people be beheaded in a single day because a city had rebelled against him. The Areli student made a sound of distress. Its forearms were wrapped tightly around its body. There was Napoleon, who conquered most of Europe and caused the deaths of millions. There was a man named Hitler, who tried to exterminate entire ethnic groups and started a war that killed 60 million people. There was a man named Stalin, who killed so many of his own people that historians still argue about the exact number, somewhere between 6 and 20 million. Yuna's voice remained calm and steady, like she was reciting facts from a textbook. There was Mao, who ruled a country called China and caused the deaths of 40 to 80 million through war and famine and political killing. There were emperors and kings and generals and revolutionaries, one after another, century after century, each one leaving mountains of corpses behind them. A chef student pulsed with a troubled light. "Why?" it asked. "Why do humans produce so many of these monsters? Is there something wrong with your species?" Yuna considered the question carefully before answering. "Perhaps," she said. "Or perhaps we are simply honest about what we are. Your species have committed terrible acts as well. We have seen the evidence today in this classroom. The difference is that humans remember our monsters. We study them. We teach our children about them. We do not hide from what we are capable of." She looked at the hologram of Genghis Khan, which still stood silently in the center of the room. "You asked why we keep his memory alive. The answer is complicated. Some people admire him. In Mongolia, he is considered a hero, the father of their nation. His face is on their money. His statue stands in their capital. They are proud of what he accomplished." The Torvan students shifted uncomfortably. They understood pride in conquest, but the scale of what Yuna described was disturbing even to them. "But most of us remember him as a warning," Yuna continued. "We remember him to remind ourselves of what happens when power has no limits. We remember the cities he destroyed and the people he killed. We remember so that we do not become him." "But you carry his blood," a Torvan said. "You said yourself that you are his descendant. Does that not make you proud?" Yuna was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I carry his blood," she agreed. "But I also carry the blood of his victims. After enough generations, everyone does. The people he killed had children too, and those children survived and had their own children. The conqueror and the conquered became mixed together over time. I am not just the descendant of Genghis Khan. I am the descendant of everyone he touched, including those he destroyed." She touched the wolf pendant beneath her uniform. "My grandmother gave me this when I left Earth. She said it was to remind me where I came from. But she also said something else. She said that the wolf can choose not to hunt. The predator can become the protector. The destroyer can become the builder. That is the choice every human faces, every single day." Professor Velix stepped closer to her. "Miss Park, I must ask you something directly. Was your speech today intended to frighten us? To intimidate the Galactic Council into treating humanity with more respect? No, Una said simply. It was intended to educate you. You invited humans to join your civilization. You welcomed us into your academies, and your markets, and your governments. But you did this without truly understanding what we are. She stood up and faced the professor directly. You look at humans and you see a young species. You see soft bodies and short lifespans. You see people who smile and shake hands and speak politely. You think we are harmless. You think we are weak. You think we are safe. Her eyes met his compound gaze without flinching. We are none of those things. We come from a death world where everything is trying to kill everything else. We survived because we were better at killing than anything else on our planet. We conquered our entire world before we ever reached for the stars. And we did it by being smarter, more adaptable, more ruthless, and more determined than any other creature Earth has ever produced. The classroom was utterly silent. You should know this, Una said. You should know what you have invited to sit at your table. Not because we intend to harm you, but because understanding is the foundation of true peace. If you only see the mask we wear, you will never understand the face beneath it. She sat back down. Humanity is not peaceful by nature, she said quietly. We are peaceful by choice. And that choice is made fresh every single day, by every single human, because we all know exactly what we are capable of. We all carry the wolf inside us. And we all choose, again and again, not to let it hunt. The hologram of Genghis Khan flickered and faded, leaving only empty air where he had stood, but his presence remained, somehow. His wolf eyes seemed to watch them still, and for the first time in 300 cycles of teaching, Professor Velix realized that he knew absolutely nothing about the species called humanity. The class ended in silence. Students filed out without speaking, their minds heavy with new thoughts. The Torvan walked with less pride in their steps. The Sheth moved slowly, their crystal forms dim with contemplation. The Areli did not chatter among themselves as they usually did. Even the other human students seemed affected, looking at Una with a mixture of respect and something that might have been gratitude. Una stayed behind. She remained in her seat until the classroom was empty, staring at the space where the hologram had stood. The Wolf pendant felt warm against her skin, as if it held the memory of a fire that had burned 800 years ago. Professor Velix did not leave either. He stood at the front of the room, organizing his materials with slow, mechanical movements. His many eyes kept glancing at the human girl, trying to understand her, trying to see past the quiet surface to whatever lay beneath. Finally, he spoke. Miss Park, may I ask you something? Una looked up. Of course, Professor. Velix set down his materials and walked toward her. His movements were careful, respectful, as if he were approaching something dangerous. In all my cycles of teaching, I have shown students the worst beings our galaxy has produced. I have watched young warriors flinch at the cruelty of Morvac. I have seen the chef struggle to accept what the devouring silence did. I have witnessed students from every species confronting the darkness of their own histories. He stopped a few meters away from her, but I have never seen what I saw today. You did not flinch. You did not struggle. You simply explained, as if you were discussing the weather. As if the deaths of 40 million people were just facts to be recited. Una considered his words before responding. Because they are facts, she said. Terrible facts, but facts nonetheless. Flinching from them does not make them less true. Struggling against them does not bring back the dead. The only thing we can do is understand them, learn from them, and try to make sure they do not happen again. She stood up and gathered her notebook. Professor, may I be honest with you? Please. I was afraid to come to this academy, Una said. I was afraid because I knew that humans were seen as a young species, barely worth noticing. I knew that the other students would look at us and see weakness, softness, irrelevance. She walked toward the window that looked out at the stars. But I was also afraid for another reason. I was afraid because I know what humans truly are. I know the darkness we carry inside us. I know the things we have done to each other throughout our history. And I was afraid that if the galaxy ever discovered this, they would be terrified of us. They would want to destroy us before we could do to them what we did to ourselves. Professor Velix moved to stand beside her. Outside the window, countless stars burned in the darkness. Somewhere out there, trillions of beings lived and worked and dreamed, unaware of the small human girl standing in this classroom. And now? Velix asked. Now that you have revealed this truth, are you still afraid? Una smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, warm and young and full of hope. No, she said, because I realized something important. The galaxy needs to know what we are. Not to fear us, but to understand us. If you only see the peaceful humans who smile and trade and follow the rules, you will never trust us. You will always wonder what we are hiding. You will always wait for the wolf to show its teeth. She turned to face him. But if you know the truth, if you understand what we came from and what we choose to be despite that heritage, then maybe you can trust us. Maybe you can see that our peace is not weakness. It is strength. It takes no effort to be peaceful when you have never known violence. It takes tremendous effort to be peaceful when violence runs in your blood. Professor Velix was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. You are wiser than your years, Miss Park. I believe I have much to learn about your species. That is all we ask, Una said. Learn about us. The real us. The monsters and the saints, the conquerors and the healers, the wolves and the shepherds. We are all of these things, often in the same person. That is what makes us human. She started toward the door, then stopped. Professor? Yes? My grandmother told me something before I left. Earth. She said that the most dangerous creature in the universe is not the one with the biggest teeth or the sharpest claws. It is the one that knows its own nature and chooses what to do with it. She opened the door. Humans know our nature. We have stared into the darkness of our own history and seen the worst of what we can be. And every day, every single day, we choose to be something better. Not because it is easy, not because it comes naturally, but because we know the alternative. She stepped through the door. The wolf can hunt, Professor. It will always be able to hunt. But a wolf that chooses not to hunt, that uses its strength to protect instead of destroy, that is something rare and precious. That is what humanity is trying to be. The door closed behind her. Professor Velix stood alone in the empty classroom, surrounded by the ghosts of warlords and the weight of history. He looked out at the stars and thought about wolves and sheep, about nature and choice, about a small girl who carried the blood of a monster and chose to be something else. He thought about humanity. And for the first time in 300 cycles, he felt something he had not expected to feel. Not fear, not disgust, not pity. Hope for a species that had clawed its way up from darkness, that had faced its own demons and refused to surrender to them, that chose peace, not because it was weak, but because it was strong enough to make that choice. Hope for the future of a galaxy that now included these strange, soft, dangerous, wonderful creatures called humans. Outside the classroom window, the stars continued to burn, and somewhere among them, a young woman with wolf's eyes and a wolf's blood walked toward a future that her grandfather could never have imagined. She did not hunt. She chose, and that made all the difference.